I'm gonna love you.
Hey guys, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge. So you had the first playoff with Maxime-Lagrave against Hikaru Nakamura. Now let me go over the format with you. The first they'll play 2 rapid games, 10 minutes with a 5-second increment. And then if they're still tied after that, they'll play 2 blitz games, 3 minutes per side with 2-second increments. And then if they're still tied after that, they'll play an Armageddon game where white will have 5 minutes and black gets 4 minutes, but black will have drawing odds. So if black draws, then he actually wins the match. So they played the first 2 rapid games and they were still tied. Now they come to their first blitz game, and I want to go over that because this is a decisive game here. MVL was white, Nakamura was black. Starts off E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop B5. We have the Ruy Lopez, knight F6. So we have the Berlin Wall. Castles. Knight takes pawn. You have D4 here. Knight goes back. This is main line for the Berlin defense. Pawn takes bishop. And then white takes, and the material balance is restored in the game. Knight goes to F5. Queens come off the board early in the game. You have your Berlin ending, as a lot of people like to call it. And now you have the king moving over to the E8 square, this variation here. And MVL is an expert in the Berlin defense. I mean, they all play the Berlin defense, and they're great at it, the super GMs. But MVL is one of the best Berlin defense players on the white side. Him and Fabiano Caruana is also very, very good from the white side of the Berlin. And then, of course, you know, Vladimir Kramnik and Magnus are great from the black side. So now you have H5, Rook D1, Bishop E7. They're just developing their pieces, trying to get their pieces to better squares. Bishop E6. And then once we get later on in the game, I'm gonna go ahead and give a little bit more analysis, but we just got to get through the initial phase of the game here. Now here, this could have been a draw. Nakamura played Bishop C8, and then MVL's knight went back to E2, and then Nakamura went right back to E6. If they would have repeated this a couple times more, then it would have been a draw. Hikaru was fine with the draw. He would have took a draw, no problem, being black in this position here. But that would have been a waste for MVL to play with the white colors, and just take a draw after 15 moves. So he plays B3 and continues on with the game. Now you have Rook D8, Bishop G5. Bishops are traded off the board. A little more maneuvering. In the Berlin, you get just lots of maneuvering and trying to get your pieces to good squares. Black kind of has to unravel. The thing about the Berlin defense for black's queen gets traded, and you take with the king, and then you have to do a little bit of unraveling. It's a little bit easier for white to play, in my opinion, but it's still super solid though and hard to crack. Knight takes. Now you have Rook D5, which hits the E pawn there, and white did not defend the E pawn. You might be wondering why he didn't defend the E pawn, because the move in the game was Rook D7, but if he would have played Rook captures here, then that would have been a dubious move because now you have f4 hits the rook, and the rook doesn't have that many squares to go to. If you look at the board, it's that square is covered. This square is covered by the knight. Of course, this square is covered by the pawn. This square is covered. This square is covered by the knight. And this square is covered. So he only has one square to go to, and that's c5. Let me see. So he plays the rook c5. Now you have rook e1 that hits the bishop. And then you have f5 supporting that bishop there. And then you would have knight takes f, rook takes knight, and then rook takes bishop. And then like the material exchange is even. It's not like someone gained any extra material, but it's just white's position would be so much better than black's as far as activity level. White would control the E file, and his other rook would be coming to control the D file as well. And then black's rook is just passively defending the 5th rank. So it's just white's position would be a lot better. So let's go back. In the game, rook d7 was played. Now you have knight e2. Rooks are exchanged off the board. Now this here is where we start to get critical, where a lot of big time decisions have to be made. Nakamura has a better position. He's attacking the pawn and the rook here, so he has an advantage here. But the question is, can he take the pawn and still escape with his bishop without his bishop being trapped? That's the main question here. So MVL says, hey, go for it. And Nakamura thought for quite a bit. I mean, he didn't have a lot of time to think because it's only a 3-minute game, but he thought for a bit, and then he decided to take. Now you have knight d4 here, attacking the bishop, and as you can see, the bishop does not have that many squares to go to. So he grabs the other pawn on a4. So black has won 2 pawns here. Now the question is, can he get away with it? Now is the important part. Can he get away with it? You have rook a1, and black counters by hitting the knight with c5. Now you have knight going to f5 check, and then white picks off the pawn on g7. So white gets one of the pawns back. Now you have king takes e5, and rook takes bishop. Now, rook takes bishop is critical because white's knight is trapped. So it looks like black just completely dropped a piece, but white's knight can't get out. All of the squares that it can go to is covered. So Hikaru just has to play accurately, but again, they only have probably about a minute left on their clocks. This is extremely difficult, when you don't have a lot of time left. So he plays rook a8, which is a blunder, because now white can just play knight takes the other pawn on h5. He should have played b6 and just protected the a pawn with another pawn, and that way his rook would have stayed on the h file and protected his pawn on h5. So he missed that. He missed that. He decided to protect the a pawn with the rook, but that allowed the knight to get out. So, but the game's still not over though, because Hikaru has a lot of pawns on that queen side, and they're going to start to roll. So it's still not over yet. It's anyone's game still at this point. You have b5. Rook A1 was played in the game. F4 would have been better though. Maxime could have just flat out won real fast here by playing F4, because then after F4, the other pawns could have started rolling as well. And that should have been his strategy. He should have played F4, G4, H4. He should have rolled his pawns basically, and it would have been a race, but he would have won the race. But again, you can't see all that when you only have 30 seconds left on your clock. You know, in practical terms, you're looking at the big old cluster of black pawns over there, and you're thinking that his pawns is going to promote faster and quicker. So he played Rook A1. King D4 was played in the game, which is another blunder. And I just want to say that you can really see the effects of not having that much time in a real difficult king pawn rook endgame. You can really see the effects that it's having on these players, because these players usually don't make mistakes like this. And you got to factor in that they've been playing for 10 straight days, and they've been playing games before this one here. They played their regular round 10 game, and they've already played 2 rapid games. So they're tired. These players are tired. B4 was better for Nakamura, because then he could have employed the same strategy of rolling his pawns, and his pawns would have pushed. So it's still not a definite of who was going to win if he would have played B4. I mean, he wasn't for sure going to win, but it would have been a better continuation than what he played in the game, which was King D4. Now you have knight maneuvering. Pawns is traded. And at this point right here, when I took a look at it with the engine gave 0.00, a complete draw at this point. So, I mean, it was just anyone's game. The time is the biggest factor. The time clock is what decided this game here. King E2, B4. So the pawns are pushing. It's a race. Who's going to win the race? Can white stop obviously the black pawns are closer to promoting than whites. So can white stop the black pawns? That's the question. So at this point here, after King D2 is played, the engine likes black here. Black is winning here. But don't forget, I mean, Nakamura only has like 30 seconds left on the clock here. He can't afford to mess up. Now you have Rook D1 getting ready for the discovered check, and to gain a tempo as well, with the king moving closer to stop the pawns. C4 is the best move here to be played, but instead Nakamura played A2. But what that does is that gives way to this critical square here, the B2 square. The king, if the king can snuggle up in that B2 square, that stops everything. So now you have King C1, which doesn't allow for A1 promotion anytime soon because it's check. King C1 comes with check from the rook. So then now you have King C3, and this here is the critical point in the game. It seems like the game has been flip-flopping back and forth, from white winning to black winning to draw to even to black winning again. But this here is a deciding factor here. So, and it's hard to see. This is very, very hard to see. Black's pushing all his pawns toward promotion, so you would think that the king would need to run over there and help support the push, but actually white is in time to stop the pawns. So black's strategy should not have been to help the pawns out. Black's strategy should have been to try to eat the white pawns and stop the white pawns from promoting, and just give up on his pawns from promoting. That's very, very, very hard to see with 30 seconds left on your clock. So instead, King E5 was the best move in this position, going the completely opposite way of where his pawns are. I mean, that's almost impossible to see over the board. Then you would have like Knight D7, King F5. White's king would snuggle up on B2, but then you would have C3. Knight comes in. Rook E8, which is the main idea behind all this, with Rook E2 coming, check. And now the black Rook is going to gobble up the F pawn and the G pawn, and it's going to be in time to stop the H pawn. Now, that is extremely hard to see, with a little bit of time on your clock in a blitz game. You're just not going to see all that, especially when your whole mindset has been towards pushing, these pawns here towards promotion. So I don't blame Nakamura for missing that. So he played King C3 in the game, going towards his pawns with the idea of helping them promote. Now you have Knight D5, and White's in time to keep black from promoting. King C4, King B2, snuggles into that critical square. Rook E8. Now you have Knight E3 check. King B4. Rook D7 was played in the game by MVL, but that was a little bit of a mistake as well. He should have pushed his pawns at this point. He should have played H5 with the follow-ups of G4, G5, G6, and trading the pawn, the F pawn, and pushing his own pawns to promote. So that was a little bit of a mistake as well by him. So he played Rook D7 instead. Now you have C4. Nakamura wanted to shore up the B pawn, but that gives White a chance to play Rook D4. So now you have the knight and you have the rook on that C pawn. And then this is the biggest blunder of the game, because it's the last blunder of the game for Nakamura. He played Rook A8 with the idea of just trying to push that A pawn through. And then Rook takes C4 was played in the game. But let me go back here, because I think there's something here. Nakamura could have played King B5 here instead of playing Rook A8. It doesn't look like the greatest move. It looks like you're stepping back, and actually you are stepping back, but you're getting out of the way of the check, because in the game, Rook takes C4 check was played, and that just gives White another turn basically for his move. If you play King B5 now, if White takes with the knight, then you have Rook E1 to help support the pawn push on A1. So White could not have done that. White could not have taken with the knight. And then if you would play Rook takes C4 here, now you have the tactic of taking the knight, which is removing the defender, and then the king can go ahead and attack the rook on C4. So then that would have been winning for black. So that's why King B5 was a critical move here, but that was extremely hard to see. He played Rook A8 instead. Now you have Rook takes C with check. King goes back. And now you have Rook C1, which stops any type of promotion on the A file with the king and rook being right there. Now you have king b4, knight d5 check. King is moved over to the a file. And now Nakamura resigned in the game right here with king takes b3. But it was interesting to see that there was other continuations as well, though. If MVL would have played rook c5, then you would have, if king went to a4, then you would have the check with the knight going to b6 and not forks the king and the rook. And then if the king went to a6, then you would have knight c7 check, and that would fork the king and the rook as well. So this was a good game, a back and forth game. It was a typical blitz game where the both sides had a chance to win, and it was going back and forth. So Nakamura had to win the very next game in order to stay in the match, but he failed to do that. The players drew the next game, so MVL moved on to the next final round against Levon Aronian. So this ended Nakamura's quest and journey for a fourth straight Gibraltar Open. So I was a little disappointed to see him lose and lose his chance to win his fourth straight. But he had way too many draws. He started out on fire. He had 5 straight wins, and then he just became the draw master after that, and had like 5 straight draws after that. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the videos. This was Nakamura's quest for a fourth at the Tradewise Gibraltar Masters. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and congratulations to Levon Aronian. He's a really nice guy. He's a gentleman in all aspects. So I'm happy that Levon Aronian won the championship. I have nothing bad to say about him. He's one of the nicest guys on tour, and if you would get a chance to actually meet him and speak to him, you would see that he's one of the coolest guys to actually talk to and be around. So, all right, guys. See you next time.